address it up front. Put it up front, have your story. And as when I met you, I told you, I have it written out. It's sitting on the desktop of my computer, and I read it. I read it because this way I know that I've given everybody the whole story. And that's what's important.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's also the patent and trademark attorney and founder of Miller IP Law. I'm here to tell the journeys, or at least hear the journeys of a lot of great inventors, startups, small businesses, and everything in between. And today we have a guest on that I'm sure won't disappoint on all of that. His name is Nuri, and has a great, interesting story. The short of it is that right now he's working on a text message, and I'll let him explain it better than I would, but a text message company that you can then make sure to keep all of your records, make sure to track all of that. And with the advantage, and I'll let him get into that, backing up to his story, he had some startups in the 90s that he worked on, and had a brief run-in with the FBI, and he'll dive into that a little bit more. And now he's up to today and working on a great startup and a great business. So welcome to the podcast, Nuri.
Hey, Devin. How are you today?
I'm doing great as always. So maybe I gave a brief introduction, but you will do a much better job than I ever would. So maybe I'll turn it over to you. Maybe give people a bit of your background and your journey and introduction, and we'll pick it up from there.
Sure. So I've been the founder of multiple startups, had a couple of decent exits that I don't really like to talk about the past, but every one of them has been a learning experience. But the most interesting part to me is that usually to learn more from the bad parts of your life than you do from the good. So, as they say, you never lose, you just learn. And that applies to everything that I've done. Right now, we're doing a company called TechSmarter. We're about 15 people. We've been a distributed team since we started the company, and we're up and down the state of California. We're in Oklahoma, we're in New York, we're in London, we're in Colorado, and probably some places that I'm forgetting about. But at the end of a day on a Wednesday, I guess that's going to be forgiven. What we've built is a compliance service, and what it does is it addresses regulatory additions that agencies such as the FDIC and the SEC, and there's a whole bunch of 2, 3, 4, and 5-letter acronym agencies that I could drop on you, but you guys will get the point. And the way that a stockbroker, say a Merrill Lynch or a Morgan Stanley, the way that they backed up and recorded phone calls for 30 years, and the way that they backed up emails for 30 years, they've now taken those regulations and expanded them dramatically. There's now a responsibility of all of those organizations, basically every high compliance organization that's out there. This includes doctors and hospitals and nurses as well. They have to record all of their communications if they post on Facebook, if they send a text message, excuse me, if they send a message on Facebook Messenger. Basically, there are about 80 different platforms that this covers. And we don't cover them all yet, but they will all be covered eventually. The difference between us and everybody else is we took a service, excuse me, and we built something differently. I'm not going to tell you we built it better, but what we did was we approached the problem in a different way, and the result is that there are not. Excuse me, I have a frog I can't get rid of. My apologies.
You're all right.
We've solved the problem that's called leakage, and the competitors that are in our space, what they do is they require a secondary phone number to be used on the phone, and communications go through a private server. The problem is that if I have the secondary phone number on my phone and I communicate with somebody that way, but then I send a message on my primary phone, that information is never recorded. That's called leakage. We don't have to address that because we're able to access real-time information on an iOS device and an Android device. If you're sending a message from your Apple MacBook Pro, if you're sending a message from the desktop of your Dell computer, if you're sending it from your iPad, etc., we cover it all. And it's done in a real-time basis. It's fully encrypted. And so under no circumstances can anybody in an organization see the data unless they have the keys to unencrypt it. And if they do, it requires multiple permissions to get it to a point where something can be made anything but opaque.
No, I think that's a great explanation as to, how you guys approach it differently and why you do it differently. So I am going to back up because we jumped to the end of the story, and I'm all about the inventive journey. So you don't want to dwell too on the past, and I'll let you tell your story how you'd like to. But jumping back, so what you got to now where you're kind of tech smarter, and that's the surface and the company you're working on now. Backing up, how did you what's the pre-story, or how did you get into that, and why did you get into that, and why does that matter to you? Because as you mentioned, it's always kind of all about the journey, right? And you learn as much from your failures. I completely agree with you. Most of the time, successes you almost take for granted, in the sense, not that you aren't appreciative of the success, but oftentimes you don't realize, you don't learn the lessons along the way, meaning you're doing so many things are growing and going well, that you just kind of take it for granted, in the sense you don't sit back and think, okay, how did I get here, or why am I here, versus the failures are the ones that make you almost be more introspective or retrospective. So maybe for the audience, back up and say kind of how you got here and what was the journey that took you to here.
So at the end of 2012, I began looking into my next business. And I started looking into messaging, because it was obvious to me, watching my son's monthly text message numbers go up exponentially to a point where one month I figured it out, he was sending something like 70 texts a minute. And I sat back and I'm like, if this trend continues, it's obvious that there's going to be needs. Well, at about the same time that this happened, in December of 2012, very early one morning, the FBI raided my home. They didn't do anything wrong. They did their job. They sent 30 people. They had nickel-plated weapons. I have never had an unpaid parking ticket. So, but I get it, what they had to do. It's not a safe job. I respect what they did, and everybody that was there was a professional, and they did their job. It started the most difficult area of my life. The thing was that there was this really interesting simile in the area that I had headed towards with regard to text messaging, because I was indicted by the Justice Department on a federal wire fraud charge. I pled guilty to one charge after fighting it for 3.5 years, simply realizing that I couldn't win. The United States government, the Justice Department, wins 90x% of the cases they bring forward. And if you fight it, the penalization phase is significantly worse than if you cut a deal. And this is how it works. This is our country, and I'm happy to be here. All of that being said, I fought it for 3.5 years. I spent a tremendous amount of time and money fighting it, come to the realization that I couldn't win. Now, how TechSmarter became a part of this was that I realized that if I had had certain communications with other people, that I would have had what I needed to exonerate myself. And not having that ability in this time frame, shortly as 2012 ended, I changed from an Android phone to an iPhone, and I lost all my text messages. Not that I was keeping them anyway. However, if TechSmarter had existed, I would have had what I needed to avoid 7 years of trouble. But the experience, it was probably the most transformational experience of my life. I was incarcerated for 16 months and 10 days. I read 435 books in that period of time.
That's a lot of books, just by the way. That's more books than I probably, and I love reading books, and you beat me probably by far. So not to interject, but that's a big pile of books.
Well, look, you're up at 6 o'clock in the morning. You're up until 11 o'clock at night. I'm not a big TV guy. television has never been a big part of my life, with the exception of live sports. I'm a Bay Area sports fan, Giants, 49ers, Sharks, and Warriors. And in where I was in Central California, they showed more LA things than they did Bay Area sports. So I filled the time. I wrote down, I did a journal daily, and I read a great deal. I reread some classics. I read things I hadn't read through college. One of my friends sent me new books every month. And that was how I made the time go by. And it taught me. It taught me. There's a book that is hugely important to me, which I never knew existed before, called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I now live the Four Agreements every moment of my life.
And so, you just answered the question I was going to add by side or by tangent, which was of all those, you say 435? How many was it?
435 books.
435. Which one was your favorite? So was it The Four Agreements, or what was your favorite out of all of those books that you've read?
The Four Agreements affected me the most. And interestingly, I was introduced to it by one of the guards there who was teaching a class. Her name was Miss Hopkins. And the day before I left, I went to her to thank her. And, I wasn't the normal inmate going home the next day. I told her, I said, you have affected my life for the rest of my life. And she was surprised. It was just the look on her face and everything else. She was surprised. So that book affected me. My favorite book that I read during that period of time was by Angela Duckworth. It's called Grit. And it teaches you how to be tough. It teaches you how to raise children in the right way. I didn't know what it was about when I got it, and I read about it in the Wall Street Journal. And I asked my friend to send it to me. And I recommend that book and The Four Agreements to many people once we bring the subject up of talking about books. But to go back to what we were talking about.
Yeah, back from that tangent, bringing it back on the topic, but go ahead.
So I spent 16 months in federal prison in a camp. I self-reported. All those things are important because it's the same type of place it's actually the same place Michael Milken was. It's the same type of place that Martha Stewart was. But on the flip side, I was woefully unprepared for everything that I experienced during that period of time. You can't be ready for it. You're dealing with a group of people that's completely transient. People come and go daily almost. And you see things that you can't believe that you saw, and you hear things you can't believe that you heard. And there are times where things happen that you shake your head at and you go, how does this exist in 2016 or 2017? But it does. It's a whole different world. So I went through my time about a month, actually literally the end of August of 17, so less than 4 weeks before I was scheduled to go home. I got diagnosed with pneumonia after they took me to the hospital. And I spent nearly 3 weeks in the hospital, a significant amount of the period of that time in intensive care. And so the BOP took care of me. I understand there's a lot of things that are negative about them, but they took great care of me and the people that I'm aware of. And they do their job and they're professionals, and that's all there is to it. So, it's not an easy job. They deal with a whole bunch of different people with a whole bunch of different motivations and a whole bunch of different ways of being raised. So, but it now has taught me patience. It's taught me how to listen. One of the things that I believe I do better than most people is listen. And I don't listen to give a response. I listen to hear what the person is saying. And there's a huge difference.
No, and I'd say most people are guilty on when they're talking with someone, they're thinking about the next thing they're going to say, or the next, it's always a much more of a me-centered conversation of, okay, they're talking, but I'm going to prepare the next thing that I want to talk about. And you never, half the time you miss half of what the other person's saying because you're not really listening. So I completely agree. So if I were to take that, and I think it's an interesting backstory. So you had your startups before this, you were working in 2012, things, you got rated. fought it as long as you could, spent as much money as it made sense, and decided that your best course of bad options was to go to settle, self-report, go for or do that for a period of time, and then you get to the end of the 16 months and you're coming out and you're saying, okay, now what am I going to do with my life? And I imagine that's got to be, and for other people, it's coming out, whether coming out of prison, and that whether it's good, bad, whether they did something, whether they were innocent, whether or not they, whatever the case is, if you're coming out, you're now saying, what do I do with my life? How do I pick up the pieces, go back together? How do I move on? So how did you kind of make that transition of, okay, now I'm going to go back to what I'm doing, or I'm going to do something different, or, how was that transition for you? How did you decide what was the next phase of your life?
It actually took me a long time. When I got out, I was still very ill, and I spent months virtually bedridden. I was a very ill person. I have permanent lung damage, and my breathing is limited to this day now, nearly years later. That being said, I tried to get jobs. I applied for over 1,100 jobs that I was qualified for, jobs that were significantly below the income that I had earned and the types of customers that I had done business with. Yet I wanted to stay in the startup game. But when you come out and you're a convicted felon and your brother and other people tell you you'll never raise money, listen, right? Going to prison shakes your self-confidence to the core.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so many people told me that I'd never do it, and I'm stubborn like a mule. But when somebody tells me that I won't do something, I want to do it just to prove them wrong and to show myself that I can do what people think I cannot do. So, but I tried, Devin. I tried and I tried. I had hundreds of interviews, and at various stages, they got to the point, and part of my probation is that I had to disclose this to everybody, which is what I did with you the very first time we spoke. And it's something that I disclosed to everybody. It's necessary, and for the reasons why I told you, which is that if I tell you, it's not that you're hearing my side of the story, it's that I have the integrity to tell you, and that's what's important, right? Everybody has baggage, but the question is, how do you handle it? Do you carry it like it's a big lug, or a big weight, or do you carry it with grace and say, okay, this is what happened to me, but you know what? Things happen to everybody. Maybe you didn't go to prison, but I can assure you, most people have a story that they don't want people to know about.
Yeah.
But regardless, whether they do or they don't.
Yeah, and it's kind of the story. Now going back to the books, it's almost the story of the Scarlet A, right? You can either, everybody has theirs, whether or not you can see what there are. You can either wear the Scarlet A around with you being ashamed of it, or you can say, this is part of my life, it's part of my journey, and I'm going to use it as a way to build it and become better and overcome type of thing. So I like that analogy. I think that certainly makes sense. So you applied to your 1,100 jobs, and you said, okay, at some point or another, they all got to the point where they're saying, pass or no thank you, and no matter what you did, you couldn't find it. So you're left with that, and I assume that that's probably not atypical. I'm sure it is hard to come out of the prison system, and people look at you, good, bad, or indifferent, differently than when you went in, right? And so then you have kind of that. So how did you, after applying for 1,100 jobs, you said it took you a while. How did you kind of come out of that, or decide, okay, now I'm going to do this?
Through the good-heartedness of friends and advisors, I talked these things through. I talked about my frustrations. I talked about my challenges. I had people who were interested in me, but once I got to the end of the interview, and it was always in the first interview, I told them, the interest went away. And then in some cases, it got to a second, third, or fourth interview, and then I didn't get it for one reason or another. It could have been my background, either way. But it just became obvious to me that what I wanted to do with TechSmarter was the right thing to do. And in that period of time, from 16, 17 into 18, the industry had changed dramatically. Regulations that that before had been in discussion now became applicable by regulation, right? So it became more and more clear to me that TechSmarter was needed, and that it was a very big and viable business. So I started from scratch. I negotiated a single developer, and he and I did the work, and then we brought in another one, and then we slowly built a team of people who were good enough human beings and had enough faith in me as a human being to believe in my vision and the things that I knew. And now I sit back and please don't take this as arrogance, but this is genuinely how I feel. I don't think there's anybody in the world that understands compliance and the part of that business that I'm in. I don't think there's anybody that understands it better than I do. And when we talk to people, and we did a great deal of product validation, a great deal of market validation. We interviewed over 6 professionals all over the world, and we've built what they told us they wanted in an amalgamated sense. So now it's interesting. We expected to install our first customer last month. COVID has definitely slowed things down, but what we've done is we decided as this thing began, and I sent everybody from the company, I asked them to stop taking meetings about 10 days before California shut down. So give or take the 5th of March, we shut everything down. And we decided to go whole hog into continuing our development. And so now we're doing that and continuing to work towards some of the other initiatives that we have. And it's been very flattering because the response we've gotten, even as a very small company without a customer, we've talked to and had interest from some of the largest financial organizations in the world. And one of them, who I can't mention, but they are one of the 5 largest financial institutions in the world, has been piloting our service since before Christmas.
Oh, that's exciting. That's cool.
And they're very happy with it.
Cool. So now because now we've gone to the past, we've talked about the present. So now where do you think in the next 6 months to a year, where do you see things going, or how do you see things going? If you had a crystal ball.
Well, we're at a very interesting time. When the CEO of Verizon announces on TechCrunch yesterday that mobile traffic has increased by 1,200% in the last month, that's a pretty good indicator. Then you say, okay, well, text messaging on Verizon alone has increased by 9 billion texts a month. And that's just on Verizon. That's not counting the hundreds of other carriers there are out there, right? And you look at just the metric of those two things. And his conversation yesterday had nothing to do with what we're doing. Sure. But a 1,200% increase, that's a huge exposure for every potential customer that we have. And now you've got Nationwide Insurance has moved 4,000 jobs home. Facebook expects within 10 years that half of its employees, which are some 38,000, will work from home. Twitter and Square, both of those are moving their entire organizations and allowing people to work at home. And the problem with home is that there isn't anybody there to watch you. There isn't anybody there to see what you're doing. Everything is even more it's not supposed to be a secret, but it is, simply because of the environment. So what happens is that I think you're going to see some very significant organizations make the choice to work with us and install something like this. And it's important for us to be able to put forth a good story as to why what we're doing is necessary. When some of the people that we talk to about this, it's immediately George Orwell and Big Brother and all these other things. And I can't not say that's correct. I read 1984 probably in the late 70s in high school.
I
But
read it in high school too, so there we go. We both have that. It was one of my more favorite books of the ones I had to read in high school. I actually enjoyed that one. So
I did too. I did too. Actually, it's another one that I reread when I was in camp.
mm,
But the thing about it is that it's not only Big Brother, but we look at this as protection. We now live in a Me Too world.
mm,
And what has text messaging has been the Wild West. People could say anything. They could do anything, send
mm,
inappropriate pictures, inappropriate statements. And it's not on a phone call.
yeah,
And even though a text message is a quasi-permanent record, what most people don't realize is that once your phone hits 10,000 text messages, it starts erasing the oldest ones.
hmm,
So if somebody has a situation and they take their phone to human resources, their phone can do one of two things for a situation. It can either implicate somebody or it can exonerate somebody. But either way, it's protection.
yeah.
It protects the parties that are involved. It protects the employer of these people
And it
from
protects the truth, and and that's probably the
everything
biggest thing,
else.
right?
Exactly. And since our messaging is real time, if I sat here and Devin, I said to you, okay, here's my phone number. Send me a text message right now. I could go into our database here on my computer and I could show you your phone number, which I don't have your mobile number. Not that it's a secret, but I won't ask you for it now. But I could show you. I could say, Devin, send me a text message. And we were with one of the biggest banks in the world. We did a demo for them in the fourth quarter of last year.
Mm,
And this was before our product was really ready. We weren't ready to sell until March of this year. We needed to make sure that we had a bulletproof service.
yeah.
And now we're comfortable that we do.
Mm,
And it's able to scale. We could handle 10, 15, 20,000 or more employees from different organizations, and we can scale it and build it into something large to give a large organization the protections that they need. And for them to be able to withstand audits from organizations like FINRA and the SEC, where the auditor checks to make sure that this information is archived properly.
Okay. No, that's all very interesting, insightful, and I tend to agree. I don't see everybody, COVID or non-COVID aside, and COVID maybe accelerated a little bit, or at least temporarily. We're moving to more a connected society, to where I look, I look on how I communicate with everybody, and I mentioned on this podcast a little bit, and on other ones, I've done Miller IP Law, and I do a couple other startups that I'm a part of, and engineers, I use Slack. For some clients, I use text messages. For some, I use a phone call. For some, I use email. And it continues to increase. And the way that you're going to capture that, and I'm certainly sensitive as an attorney. You always laugh at why attorneys always want something in writing, and it's kind of the same thing. That way, people's memories changes, and recollections change as time goes on. And you say, no, you'll tell a client, you'll tell somebody you're talking with, or that you'll tell them one thing, and then months or years down the road, they'll say, you never told, this is what you told me. And so that's why attorneys are always so, aggressive about making sure we always put it in writing, is then you can always point back to it and say, no, remember, I can show you, this is what I said, and this is why I said it, and this was the context. So I completely get why, capturing that information. And that's why I said preserving the truth, because people's memories aren't always the truth, that they can't always remember how things, and it's not even a slight against people, right? We just naturally, our memories change and things fall over time. So I think that's very interesting. I always have so many more things that I want to touch on in the podcast that I never have. We're getting towards the end of the podcast, so I'll ask it. My questions I always ask at the end of the podcast to make sure that we hit on those. So my first question is what was the worst business decision you ever made?
I was in the liquidation business, and a member of my family had a whole bunch of inventory that I knew nothing about for that they needed to get rid of, and I said I would help them, and it cost me. I lost $50,000 that day. That was, so that the lesson from that was only do what you know.
Yeah.
Don't go into stuff you don't know. And it
Or
was,
make sure you learn the stuff before you go into it, at least, or make sure that you know it. So if you don't know it before you dive into it, become an expert on it. And I think that's a good one. So, all right. So don't get into, so now I'm going to tweak my second question. And if hopefully you don't mind, I'm going to tweak it slightly. It's normally what would be if somebody you're getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them? I'm going to tweak that slightly just based on your story. And so if you had someone that was dealing with, coming out of prison and wanting to get into startups, wanting, facing some of the same things you did of applying for lots of jobs and wanting to, and not being successful and landing a job and dealing with those difficulties. What would be the one piece if you say, hey, coming out and restarting your life, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them as to how to get into startups or small businesses and how to build that?
That's a tough question because each one of those situations are going to be unique. What I would tell anybody is address it up front. Put it up front. Have your story. And as when I met you, I told you I have it written out. It's sitting on the desktop of my computer, and I read it. I read it because this way I know that I've given everybody the whole story, and that's what's important. There isn't a right and wrong with regards to that. What there is what works for you. But more so than anything else, own your behavior, own your things, and do your best to find some commonality between you and the people that you're speaking to. Right? It used to be really easy when I was in corporate sales in my 20s and 30s. You go into somebody's office, and as you may have known, I've had a baseball in my hand since we have been doing this. And if a guy's got a baseball in the back of his office, or a football, or a picture of his kid from Pop Warner or hockey or whatever, those things are easy, right? Or if he has a model car. You don't have that anymore because you've got more things are done on video and more things are done on the phone. But a little bit of research, you can figure out what that person's into and find some commonality, find something. It's interesting too, because as I interviewed people, I found that a lot of people have good friends or family that have been incarcerated. And that was a really interesting and very unexpected turn of events in this process for me. But, one of my good friends said to me, you need to go back into tech smarter. That's your destiny. She said, there's a reason the universe is speaking to you. And I believe that at times the universe does. There's an old saying called feather brick truck. And sometimes we have to listen to the universe. And if you don't, then you feel a little itch in your ear because the feather is tickling your ear. And if you still don't pay attention, the next time you get a sign, you're going to get hit with a brick. It's not going to kill you, but it's going to sting. And if you still don't pay attention, the next time you could get hit by a truck. That might kill you or it might hurt you for a long time. But basically, the moral of the story is listen to the universe. And I did. And, I told you earlier, I was talking to Kimberly yesterday, and I told her, I've been on phone calls at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I've been on phone calls at midnight lately. Since this COVID thing happened, I don't know that I've taken a full day off since the beginning of March. But on the flip side, this is everything I asked for. This is what you and I were talking about before you started recording. This is everything I asked for. And the fact that that we're having these opportunities and speaking to people that we're speaking to, it has to do with the fact that I'm a part of a great team.
No, I think that is a ton of good advice. Everything from, making it part of your story, being upfront with it. I could take it as listen to your friends if they're pushing you in a direction, or if you have a feather in your ear, follow that passion or where the universe is pushing you to. And a lot of great thoughts on that. So as we wrap things up, and want to give you an opportunity, if people want to reach out, get connected, whether it's through Tech Smarter or have any questions or follow up or any way you get connected with you, what's the best way for them to connect up and find out more?
They can send an email to me. It's just my name. It's nuri@techsmarter.com. And I'm happy to talk to anybody. And as I said to you when you and I spoke last week,
Hmm.
one of the things that's important to me is that I didn't have resources as I got prepared to go to prison. I didn't have anybody to talk to. I didn't know what to expect. And thankfully, about a week before I went in, my brother it found out that a friend of his from the East Coast had been incarcerated.
Hmm.
And I talked, his name was Jim, and Jim helped me a lot. But I dealt with 6 months of having no information and living in fear. And it's something that people are afraid of. And I'll tell you this, if you are going to a camp or you're going to a low security facility, then what you see on television is not anything close to what it is. So if somebody wants to reach out with regards to that or anything else, the other thing that we're doing that's very different, and I didn't bring this up before, is as we grow, eventually, an undetermined percentage of people that work for TechSmarter will be people that are out on probation and that we want to provide a way for people to come back into society, learn a new skill so they don't have recidivism and they don't go back. The hardest part is like 70% of people who are incarcerated go back. And those numbers are heartbreaking. And if we can affect one life or 2 lives or 10, whatever it is, then we've made the world a little bit of a better place. And if we can teach them something, provide them with a job for 2 or 3 years, and then they can move on to something else, and we can bring in new people who can learn from us, and we can teach them. And the fact that the CEO of the company spent time in prison, they're going to see it differently, but they're also going to understand that I'm going to understand where they come from, what they saw.
No, on both of those, I think that, first of all, that's a cool mission. I think that there's certainly, people coming out, giving people a purpose, and even whether it's from prison or otherwise, giving people a purpose, giving people a path forward, ability to grow and to overcome whatever whatever their scarlet A is, whatever their background is, whatever they're dealing with in life, whether it's any of those. And I think that to take that as a mission, both in order to help those people coming out of prison, given your story and your experience and your journey, I think is great. And also giving the offer, hey, if people are wanting to know more, or they're going to be going into prison, or knowing what to deal with and how to deal with it, or coming out, I think it's great that you're offering that as a resource, in addition to TechSmarter and the company you're building in that. So on all of that, very much appreciated, and that's a great offer. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I always get to the end of these, and I think I almost say it every time, but it's true with this one nonetheless. But there's so many more fun things that we could talk on, dive in deeper in that, and I always run out of time. And so we'll have to have you on another time and see how your story goes. And as you continue to ramp up and come out of COVID and things continue to grow and build and all of those great things, it'd be fun to have you on again. So thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure. For those of you that are interested in being a guest on the Inventive Journey, we always love to hear everybody's inventive journey and their story for the startups and small businesses and how they go about that. You can reach out and apply for the podcast at inventivejourney.com. And you can, if you ever need any help with patents and trademarks, I'm here to help startups and small businesses at Miller IP Law. Thank you again, Nuri, for coming on. It was a pleasure. It was fun to talk with you, and I appreciate you sharing your journey.
Thanks, Devin.